Good evening. We are here today, Terry Jones's house, one of the 6 pythons. People not carved out of stone, but carved out of something else. They are Python, and here on this very table, the Monty Python television series was written 30 years ago. Crazy sketches that were taken into the BBC, and the BBC said, well, all right, because they didn't know what they got, because they were fools. Here, the albatross that was round John Cleese's neck when he said, albatross, what flavours? Not any bloody flavours, bloody albatross flavour. The entire family tree from here to 30 years. Their sketches, their albums, their radio times, their matching time, handkerchief videos, CD-ROMs, everything. The Python story starts here, and it is a story. The Pythons came from ordinary provincial towns, except the American one, who came from Minneapolis. They were clever, good at games, apparently, and listened to the goons.
What's that?
Oh, you hear that, Min?
What's that?
It's the war whoops of the Nakataka Indian.
Oh, are they the ones that commit atrocities?
Yes, Min.
I'll go upstairs and get ready.
At Oxford, Michael Palin was studying history when he met English student Terry Jones. Over in Cambridge, another English student, Eric Idle, was punting with John Cleese, studying law, and medical student Graham Chapman. Terry Gilliam, the American one, was studying political science at a college in Los Angeles. Kind of funky. At university, their academic pursuits took second place to writing, performing, and being funny. In England, Peter Cook and Beyond the Fringe had proved that you could do this sort of thing for a living. There was never a better time to be clever, eccentric, witty, and looking for that first job in television.
Terry was a script advisor to the comedy department. So it meant you had to write filler material for shows with people like Ross Conway and Ken Dodd. And if we were around, we'd get roped in. And I think one of the first things I ever did with Terry was actually to appear as an extra on the Ken Dodd show.
Mike and I started writing together and writing material for Kathy Kirby's show. I remember doing a Billy Cotton banjo and things. And then Mike and I started for the Frost stuff.
Fellow Oxbridge graduate David Frost had made a great impact on television with That Was the Week That Was, and was the perfect producer to encourage new talent into the business.
Well, we were very lucky. We were the first generation who could go straight, really, from university into television. You know, before that, usually people had gone to Fleet Street or somewhere and then moonlit or moonlighted on television. And now we were the first generation to go straight into television.
It was a great sort of experience, really. And particularly, when I say for Mike and I, we did some studio sketches, but we got involved with writing these little visual things, which were, I think one of the things was what happens to judges when they have a recess.
It was no surprise that John went on to take a prominent role in Frost's next program, at last the 1948 show.
Now, let's see if we can remember our names for this evening, shall we? Bude, don't tell me, Bude.
I thought it was Doris, sir.
Good, well, that's splendid.
Sir, do I have to be Doris, sir? It's such a mousy name.
Well, what would you prefer?
Bubbles, sir. Bubbles.
Bubbles. Well, Bubbles it is.
The big break for Michael, Terry G and Eric came with a kids show produced by Humphrey Barclay, where they said, stuff the kids, let's write it for us.
Yes, once again we halt a little bit of London's traffic to bring you Do Not Adjust Your Set. Tonight, we're going to show you one of the most extraordinary sights ever seen on television screens.
Switch it off. Switch it off.
It was at 5:25 in the evening, and we got a lot of adults came in from work and would switch on to us, so we were getting a great crossover audience.
I am a laddie.
Eddie, he's late!
Now for Abanazar.
What is your command?
Ah, Cassis. Die, Abanazar.
Spare me, spare me.
Spare him. You are spared.
I am spared.
I love you.
I love you. I love you.
I love you.
They've done it! They've done it! A new pantomime world land speed record, 1 minute 52 seconds, a new record for Britain. What a performance!
Terry G had recently arrived from America in a big coat. He watched Do Not Adjust Your Set and immediately thought that the program could use some animation and that he should do it.
I went down there with my portfolio of all my drawings plus written sketches, and Humphrey turned out to be an amateur cartoonist, and he liked the cartoons, and I think he took pity on me and bought some written sketches, which he then forced on the others, much to, I think, their chagrin that this interloper had arrived, this somebody from outside was moving into their turf.
So we were there having our pints of beer after the show, and Terry Gilliam comes in, this wonderful fur coat, you just remember, all down to his feet, and a very, very glamorous girlfriend, you know. We hated him immediately.
Eric was the most friendly. He befriends strangers quicker than the rest. And Mike and Terry, I just remember sitting they were in the back of the bar, glowering. Who is this guy with the big coat? Terry had what Terry has now, you know, this terrific energy, full of ideas, and said that he did these. Animation was his thing, you know, and so I think we said, well, yeah, why not? As soon as we saw the first, I think it was the Christmas card animation he did, it was just wonderful.
Yes, a card makes Christmas complete.
I just thought they were very, very funny. And what struck me most of all about Terry's animation, first of all, was his comic timing in them. It was so good. And the way he used sound effects. It was all very simple. It was almost like sort of child's collage effect. The drawings weren't that elaborate, he just moved things around. But it was the timing was absolutely spot on, and that's what impressed me.
ITV said to us, right, you kids are good. We're going to give you your own adult show. You're going to do 3/4 of an hour. And we said, oh, that's great. So we're having our own TV show now. But they said, well, we can't do it for another 18 months, unfortunately, because we can't give you a studio till then. Thames Television said this. And meanwhile, John and Graham came to us, and all that sort of thing happened where we suddenly did Python instead.
What Thames TV didn't realise is that saying, wait 18 months, is not as sexy as the BBC saying, hey, do you want to do it right now? So this ramshackle group of comedy gladiators were only too happy to mosey round to the Mr. Big of BBC comedy at TV Centre.
We'd met up and had this extraordinarily bad sort of job interview where we'd all been put in a room, and Michael Mills, the head of comedy, came in and said, well, what are you going to call the show? And we said, well, we don't know. Well, it's going to, you know, will it have music in it? Well, we don't know. Will it be star guests? We don't know. You know, hopeless. We were absolutely hopeless. And at the end of it, he stood up, looking slightly irritable, and said, all right, I'll give you 13 shows, but that's all.
I think the lovely thing was there wasn't a sign of a spotlight on us from anywhere, and we'd been given this little sort of backwater to play in, and we never thought we'd get on before 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. So we were just able to play, and there was a sense of excitement from quite early on that we were being able to throw out all the conventions that we thought were boring. And I remember one particular meeting when we began to get a sense there was a sort of an energy running, that we were all facing in the right direction, although we couldn't have, or the same direction, where we couldn't have actually defined what it was.
A lot of time was spent on deciding what to call the programme. Bun, Wacket, Buzzard, Stubble and Boot was one. Arthur Megapode's Cheap Show was another. Owl's Stretching Time, my favourite. But they were all abandoned in favour of Monty Python's Flying Circus, which is complete nonsense, but which now seems like a big name in a dictionary and really quite sensible. The Pythons really planned to push the boat out in comedy terms. But just as they were about to push their boat out, they saw...
Sir William Blobbs, a clear win there by 8 bars in the key of E-flat.
Comedy hero and ex-goon Spike Milligan had already pushed the boat out with his television series Q5.
Here we are for the start of the 400-meter standing still dash. Inside lane is Grandy of Ireland.
So the Pythons realized they had to push the boat out a lot further, or maybe attach a motor to the boat, or get a bigger boat.
They're off. The inside lane was making the game.
Spike suddenly exploded comedy. I suddenly realized we'd all been writing cliches in a way, and that the cliche was a 3-minute sketch which had a beginning, middle, and end with a punchline, or you wrote a one-liner, or what we'd call a blackout sketch, which would be like 30 seconds with one joke.
Stop! You're all wrong! It's John Bluthal of Field with Lost for Something fame.
Spike showed that you could change, you could break this up, you could have sketches that went into other sketches, you could sort of have things that didn't have punchlines, you could play around with it.
Just a minute. Who are you? Reveal yourself. Mother!
And it made me start thinking differently. And I can just remember Terry Gilliam had done this animation for Do Not Adjust Your Set.
Elephants in war.
And he'd said, I don't know, it's a sort of stream of consciousness. It just goes from one thing to another. It's not about anything, really. I don't know whether it works.
The elephant of surprise.
And I suddenly thought, well, maybe you could do that for the whole show. You could have live action and animation, and everything could go in and out of each other and flow on.
With this plan in mind, the Pythons began to write. Eric wrote on his own. John wrote with Graham. Terry G. animated alone. And Michael wrote with Terry J. The writing partnerships were fixed, and the system democratic, though not in the classical Greek sense of the word.
Mike and I think originally we'd started by sitting opposite at tables, writing together, sort of word by word. But we gave that up quite early on, actually, and found that it was much more productive to write alone and then come to each other with written material, read it out, say, that's good, let's use a bit of that, put this together, and then, when you're together, you just make a compilation job.
I joined up with Graham because we'd been writing stuff even together at Cambridge, which would have been 61. Gray's way of working was always to sit on the outside and then to lob an idea or a line from out of left field into the engine room, but he could never be the engine room. If you put the pad in front of Graham and gave him the pencil, nothing would happen. But his embroidering and his weird takes on things, coming in from odd tangents, very frequently breathed life into a sketch that was actually getting rather predictable.
We did all sort of come at our writing from different angles, I suppose. I mean, Graham and John seemed to have an obsession with animals and thesauruses and things like that he would use, like the cheese shop is really just a list of great cheeses. They love reference book humour like that.
Liptar? No. Lancashire? No. White Stilton? No. Danish Blue? No. Double Gloucester? No. Cheshire?
I suppose Terry and myself were slightly more odd and surreal, and I think something like the Spanish Inquisition, for instance, could not have been written by John and Graham in quite the same way.
One on crossbeam's gone out askew on treadle.
Pardon?
One on crossbeam's gone out askew on treadle.
I don't understand what you're saying.
One of the crossbeams has gone out askew on the treadle.
What on earth does that mean?
I don't know. Mr. Wentworth just told me to come in here and say that there was trouble at the mill, that's all. I didn't expect a kind of Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Our chief weapon is surprise. Surprise and fear. Fear and surprise. Our two weapons are fear and surprise and ruthless efficiency. Our three weapons are fear and surprise and ruthless efficiency and an almost fanatical devotion to the Pope. Amongst our weaponry are such elements as fear. I'll come in again.
Eric was very much on his own, which he always felt was a little unfair because when he wrote something, in a sense, he only had one vote potentially sitting there, and I know that he felt that was unfair, but at the same time it enabled him to control when he wanted to write, and Eric is a very independent guy. He likes that kind of freedom.
Rumpeltweezer ran the Dinky Tinky shop, in the foot of the magic oak tree, by the wobbly dum-dum bush, in the shade of the magic glade, down in Dingley Dell. Here he sold contraceptives and...
Also, working on his own and pleasuring himself with a pen, paper, and some scissors was Terry Gilliam.
Discipline?
I had the most freedom within the group, to be quite honest, because I couldn't describe accurately what I was doing until it was there, it was finished. It was a done thing by the time they really saw it.
This is a sweetie baby. You shouldn't let him suck on the tongue, my dear.
Oh, my God.
No! Don't touch it!
And I was the only one in those meetings because I didn't have any written material that could be totally non-political and just laugh openly and react very immediately and simply, because others would even guard their laughter and their response to it, because if that one got in, then their thing might not get in. And so in a strange way, I became the audience.
The first program was broadcast on the 5th of October 1969 on BBC One at 10:55 p.m. GMT, or thereabouts. At the recording session, the real studio audience stared at them as if they were 6 pigs playing banjos at a bar mitzvah.
We were very nervous.
Good evening.
There weren't many laughs. The studio audience was probably in shock.
Hello again, and welcome to the show.
And I remember afterwards in the bar, certain people who were quite close friends saying, oh, well, no, I won't have a drink tonight. Got to dash home, you know, babysitter. Didn't even have babies. You know, any excuse to go. So it was a touchy time. It wasn't that we all leapt in the air and said, this is a great breakthrough in world comedy. We have broken down the barriers of comedy that will be remembered for years to come. It was just, God, we got through that night and we've got another chance to do it next week.
Over the next 4 years, Python produced 4 series and 45 episodes of their hit series. Fans began to wear knotted hankies on their heads and watch the show in their millions, and there was a film of favourite sketches made, and now for something completely different. Books and records were released, and they all packed with weird, crazy writing and memorable characters that we knew would be remembered up to and including a 30-year documentary.
Well, John's obviously the cruel, heartless bastard.
Now, I know some hospitals where you get the patients lying around in bed.
Then Michael was the sweet, you know, and rather slightly ineffective lower middle-class person.
I have a silly walk, and I'd like to obtain a government grant to help me develop it.
And Terry was the rat-bag woman.
Oh, I wet him.
And Gilliam was anything that had unpleasant makeup jobs. I suppose I played kind of, I don't know, either cheeky people, you know, or kind of up people, optimistic people who are insanely optimistic.
Are you the registrar?
I have that function.
Well, I was here on Saturday getting married to a blonde girl, and I'd like to change, please. I'd like to have this one instead.
What do you mean?
Well, the other one wasn't any good, so I'd like to swap it for this one, please. I have paid. I paid on Saturday. Here's the ticket.
Terry and I couldn't play authority figures. We were just not terribly believable. Whereas John and Graham looked like eminently respectable people from the Foreign Office.
I'm afraid that the Ministry of City is no longer getting the kind of support that it needs. You see, there's defence, social security, health, housing, education, city walks. They're all supposed to be. But last year, the government spent less on the Ministry of City Walks than it did on national defence.
It was a tremendous plus to be able to have people who looked like that and then did extremely silly things.
A very big welcome, please, for the Great Minister of Pensions and the Social Security.
Graham was quite possibly the best actor of all of us. But he used to get scared because he didn't really learn the line in the first place, and then he'd get scared during the day, and then he'd go and have a couple of drinks to sort of calm his scaredness down, and then that would have the inevitable effect, and he'd have 2 more before we went on the air. But intrinsically, I think he was the best actor.
His new play opens at National Theatre tomorrow.
Oh, that's good.
Good? Good? What do you know about it?
What do you know about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to fly to Paris, back at the Old Vic for drinks at 12, sweating the day through press interviews, television interviews, then getting back here at 10 to wrestle with the problem of an homosexual nymphomaniac drug addict involved in the ritual murder of a well-known Scottish footballer? That's a full working day, lad.
I wasn't such a good woman. Terry was a very good woman.
Hello, Mrs. Rogers? No? Oh, I must be in the wrong house.
A lovely sort of homely, mum-like figure. And Eric was this slightly sort of exotic sort of spinster who'd had a bit of a naughty time sometime in her life.
Last week on Party Hints, I showed you how to make a small plate of goulash go around 26 people, how to get the best out of your canapes, and how to unblock your loo. This week, I'm going to tell you what to do if there's an armed communist uprising near your home when you're having a party.
And John was just this sort of real sort of... How can I describe it, really?
How do you do?
How do you do?
The Pythons played a lot of female characters themselves, but if they ever needed a female character you were actually attracted to, they called on Carol Cleveland.
The fellas were always apologizing to me for not having more for me to do. Now, they did write very well for the older women, which they played themselves so well, far better than I could, but they couldn't write funny parts for young women.
Are you the marriage guidance counsellor?
Yes, good morning.
Morning, sir.
And good morning to you, madam.
They'd only written 5 scripts to begin with, and I think I got 3 of them prior to filming. And I read through them and thought, well, some of it was very funny. Some of it, admittedly, went right over my head. And some of it, the rest of it, I just thought was plain infantile. I mean, I thought, what is this all about? So I just threw myself into it, and gradually came round to thinking, hey, this is great stuff. It's silly, it's bizarre, it's clever, it's wonderful.
What seems to be the trouble with your marriage, Mr. Pewty?
Well, it all started about 5 years ago. We started going on holiday to Brighton together. Deirdre, that's my wife, has always been a very good companion to me. Well, I never particularly anticipated any marital strife.
She was used very much in a sexual role whenever there had to be real sex. And we would nick all the other parts where you had to be just like cheeky women, you know, silly old ugly women. And she was very tolerant and very good at that. And I think she was a female. It was a stooge, largely.
You suspected your wife?
Well, yes.
24764.
Looking back on his early work, Terry Gilliam is baffled by how he created such weird stuff.
When I do see them by mistake, I'm always surprised by them. I look at the animation and I'm kind of amazed by it because the guy who did it isn't me.
Henry, turn that television off. You know it's bad for your eyes.
I mean, it's somebody else that did that. I mean, I recognize some of me in it, but it's not. And I don't know how I thought of those things. Quite honestly, I look at it, Jesus, what was my mind doing? How did I get to that point?
Despite the success of Python and the winning of a prize at the Montreux Film Festival, John had been restless for some time, and by the end of Series 3 he decided to leave the group, like a penguin leaves the other penguins, and jumps into the water and swims off.
Because he'd written the Frost Report for 3 years beforehand, he ran out of steam writing the 3-minute sketch much sooner than everybody else did, which is why he wanted to leave much sooner than everybody else. He'd done it.
I felt very much that we were repeating ourselves. I felt that Gray and I only wrote 2 genuinely original things in the whole of the last series, and I think they were Dennis Moore and the Cheese Shop. And I just felt that everyone else's material was also repetitive, and that if anyone said a sketch, I could say that's that sketch from the first series combined with that sketch from the second series, and a little bit of that sketch from the second series too. And once you could begin to identify sketches like that, I thought, why are we doing it? Whereas the other guys liked the process. And I was carrying Graham, and there was no chance that anyone was going to start writing with him. And I also wanted to move on.
As their TV life came to an end, the Pythons, including John, found themselves wanting to work on a bigger canvas. Seeing as they could all spell the word history, they decided to produce a film of the quest for the Holy Grail.
Charlie, you come to this mark there, to where Suko is. The Suko even further.
Filming Holy Grail was just a nightmare. We had 5 weeks to film it, and we're shooting up in Scotland. And we just, I mean, everybody said, you can't shoot it in this time, and there's no way you can do it. And we just knew we just had to try and get through it all.
You can to start with.
I just remembered being cold and damp, and you could tell what time of day it was by how far the wet had soaked up your woolen armour.
We used to put on this absurd chain mail, which was nothing more than knitted string, and there was no money at all. So we'd get up on this Scottish mountain at 8 o'clock, and it would rain, and there'd be no umbrellas, and we would simply stay wet for the rest of the day. And then at 6:15, there was this mad rush to get back to the hotel because there was enough hot water for 40% of the cast and crew. It was just a nightmare. And yet, there was a good feeling that there were funny stuff, you know. If you feel you're being funny, you can put up with almost anything.
I think there was an instinct at work. We kind of knew when things were going to be right. And, I mean, Graham was, maybe by default he got King Arthur, but he was absolutely superb. He was a really good actor, Graham.
Go and tell your master that we have been charged by God with a sacred quest. If he will give us food and shelter for the night, he can join us in our quest for the Holy Grail.
You know, this sort of patient, baffled, bewildered earnestness.
Well, I'll ask him, but I don't think he'll be very keen. He's already got one, you see.
What? He says they've already got one. Are you sure he's got one?
Oh, yes, it's very nice,
He had a problem which we didn't really realise. Nobody realised quite how much into the alcoholism he was at the time.
Can we come up and have a look?
Of course not. You are English type, sir.
Well, what are you, then?
If you look at the outtakes, he couldn't remember a line. So it's all, the outtakes would go something like this. My name is Arthur. Yes? King of the Britons. King of the Britons. Yes? Whose castle is this? I wish to see him, you know, so we were always forced to cut back to us in all these takes. But he would do his lines perfectly. It was good with Graham being the leader.
If you do not agree to my commands, then I shall...
The film did make a lot of money. I think it made $12 million. And on the basic investment, that was a fantastic turnover.
The film was a big old success and acquired some interesting fans.
I went to Graceland because I'm a big Elvis fan, and they had Elvis's video collection had been kept there, and there was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Apparently it was one of Elvis's favourite films, and he used to recite chunks as well. Elvis used to do the knights who say,
Who are you? We are the knights who say...
Elvis and Monty Python. I just can't see that working, but he loved him.
And that's just saying,
Holy Grail was released in the States, and the Python TV series was first aired on a local network in Dallas, and then went all across the US. Everyone expected Python to sync without a trace, but weirdly, it didn't, man.
Most Americans were laughing at things they didn't have any idea what the references were. But it's that sheer strangeness and the sense of timing, and like all good comedy, timing. And it had just the characters, the visuals, the drag. It comes back once again to drag. And there's nothing funnier than Terry Jones in a wig. And I'm sorry, and he's attractive in a wonderful way, in a kind of a French-Italian... Yes.
Anyway, I think I'd better be going.
You've got a nice torch, haven't you?
When it came on, it used to play on Sunday evenings, and it kind of replaced religion for me. That was my Sunday ritual. Sunday evenings, tune in the Pythons, and I just loved it.
I've always assumed it's an explanation, but it's not one I'm sure about, that somehow the characters that we did were kind of archetypes because they seem to have rung bells with people, even in Japan.
You don't have to, have a PhD to understand Ministry of Silly Walks. It's funny if you showed it to an 8-year-old. It's funny because look at that silly walk.
I think I was in about 3rd grade, so I was about 8 years old
when I first saw it. And you know, the irony is that for us, that was the dirty little show that the kids weren't supposed to watch. And then, of course, we would all go to school the next day and talk about it. And you had to sneak downstairs and you know, turn it on. And if Mom caught me, she would be very angry, because I was supposed to be in bed, first of all, but also just because of what I was watching. You know, because there was titties. I mean, that was the key. But it was really, you know, being 8 years old, that was my introduction to humor, really.
Python just, it gave me something like when I was growing up in like Anytown, USA, like just something that I felt was like mine, and I felt like it gave me like, I don't know, just some kind of edge on humor that other people didn't see. Like, I felt like, probably for not probably wasn't a good thing, but in a cocky way, I felt like I saw humor in a bigger, better, wider way than other people who were just sitting around watching, you know, I don't even know what the hell kind of comedy was. Three's Company and stuff like that.
Although the TV series of Python was an ex-parody, by the mid-70s the Pythons were taking part in a huge amount of acting, writing and directing. A big old list of memorable projects. Ripping Yarns, The Ruttles, Jabberwocky and Faulty Towers. But Monty Python lived on in stage shows for Amnesty International, and Python junkies could now see their favorite sketches being performed live.
I wish to register a complaint. Sorry, we're closed for lunch. Never mind that, my lad. I wish to complain about this parrot, what I purchased not half an hour ago from this very boutique. Oh, yes, the Norwegian blue. What's wrong with it? I'll tell you what's wrong with it, my lad. It's dead. That's what's wrong with it.
I particularly enjoyed those shows again, those Amnesty shows, because we used to go on in the theatre after the evening show, whatever was on there, had stopped. You know, that audience would leave, and then an hour later our audience would arrive. And it started at about 11 o'clock. And there was a nice feeling that everyone knew it was going to be a little bit rough, because it was a charity show and it was late at night. And that rough edge, in a funny kind of way, made it more fun for me. And I always have enjoyed performing with Michael, because we kind of tried to break each other up.
He's stunned! Stunned? Yeah! You stunned him just as he was waking up. Norwegian blue stunned easily. Now listen, matey, I've had enough of this.
John was very good at that, and he'd throw extra lines in or just look at me in a certain way, and I'd crack up, and similarly with him too. And I seem to remember that, having a great time, but being very naughty and cracking up an awful lot.
Oh, he's probably pining for the fjords. Pining for the fjords? To laugh at.
Even though the Pythons were now on solo projects, the success of Holy Grail and the desire to work together again produced one of the most controversial of their films, but also their happiest experience as a team.
At the opening of Holy Grail, when some interviewer said, "What's your next film going to be?" and I said, "Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory." And I got a big laugh.
And so we started sort of writing various little sketches that might or might not fit in, and gradually this idea of it being about somebody called Brian who lived a life absolutely parallel to Jesus, but wasn't Jesus, but was mistaken for Jesus, came about. And Eric knew of somebody who had a house for hire in Barbados, and we all agreed to go there and write. And I remember being a little bit sort of cautious about whether we could really write in such a sort of paradise. Typical sort of old English granny-ish view I had of these things. It turned out to be a very successful writing period. Brian was probably the best time for us all working together. And we were out in Monastir, we were out in the sunshine. It was quite pleasant.
Brenda over here. We had a bit more money, so we could afford a hotel room each. And it was in Tunisia, which was quite pleasant. I think it was, and we decided that only one person should direct. And so Gilliam did the art direction, and Jonesy did the direction, and that was sort of spared them both agonies.
It was trying to find a way of working so that what I did was, I did what I was good at and didn't get frustrated and crazed by the other side of it. So Terry and I split, and he directed it, and I designed it. The little spaceship sequence in the middle was a way of escaping from animation and do live action stuff with models and special effects and learning how to do it. We didn't have any special effects people, so we went down to the local joke shop, bought all these exploding cigars, emptied the gunpowder out, took a light bulb, broke the glass part using the filament as the sparking device, and made the explosion. It was great because we had nothing, no money, no time, and we just had to fake it. And it's always been, to me, the best way of learning under those conditions, rather than being given everything and going out there with the best technicians, with the best designers. And you don't learn that way. I mean, my attitude is always try to learn by making the mistakes myself.
Oh, you lucky bastard.
By this time, Graham had become a reformed character. He'd stopped being this, enormously messed up alcoholic. And his real natural character came out, and he was finally able to do things without alcohol and learn his words, and he knew all his words suddenly. He didn't have to fight his nerves with this dreadful alcohol thing. So he was a sort of saint on Brian. He really was.
Let me speak to them, Pontius. Good idea, because citizens.
We had to have this crowd laughing at Graham's speech impediment as a lithbap, and Mike as somebody who can't pronounce his R's. So we got in, I think, a Tunisian comedian along. We thought, well, we'll get him talking, and then we'll shoot them laughing. And of course, it didn't really work, really. So after a while, I I got up and I said to the assistant director, I said, just tell them to do what I do, all right? So he's, and I sort of started laughing hilariously, and then fell on my back and wagged my legs in the air. And to my absolute delight, the entire 500 all laughed anyway, and then fell on the floor and waggled their legs in the air, and they thought they'd never had such a good time in their life. And the dust rose, and it looked wonderful. But of course, we weren't turning over because I was just asking them to I was trying it out, And then we shot it, but it was never quite as funny as that first moment, I'm afraid. They never laughed quite the same way.
Well, it's something I said.
Even though Brian had a strong storyline, the great sketches or scenes still jump out at you.
This man commands a quack legion. He wags as high as any in Rome. No one is to stone anyone until I blow this whistle. Do you understand? Even, and I want to make this absolutely clear, even if they do say Jehovah.
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now go away.
What's this then? Romanes eunt domus. People call Romanes, they go the house.
It says Romans go home.
No, it doesn't. All right, but apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a fresh water system, and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
I'm Brian of Nazareth.
What?
Yeah, I'm Brian of Nazareth.
Take him down.
I'm Brian of Nazareth.
I'm Brian.
I'm Brian.
The Pythons called their film The Life of Brian, but to many Christians, they thought it was the life of Jesus. But Jesus is very different spelling to Brian.
I never felt really threatened by sort of people close to home until I suppose that John and I went on this late night programme where it was debated with Malcolm Muggeridge and the Bishop of Southwark.
I simply don't think it was worthy of you. It was the sort of thing, as I say, that at Cambridge the footlights did on a damp Tuesday afternoon, or the lower fourth when I was a schoolmaster.
When we had that confrontation with Southwark and Muggeridge, my experience was that I quite enjoyed it. And it was because I felt that we were winning the argument.
400 years ago, we would have been burnt for this film. Now, I'm suggesting that we've made an advance.
And I'm suggesting...
So I quite enjoyed it, and it was only afterwards I discovered how angry and upset Michael had felt.
But this is such a 10th-rate film that I don't believe that it would disturb
Yes, I know you started with an open
faith.
mind, I realise that.
I
I knew this was wrong as we were doing it. I knew, all right, criticise us, attack us, give us a hard time, but don't dismiss us, which they were trying to do. And there was a lot of hands together and said, well, I don't think. And I think Mervyn Stockwood, the Bishop of Southwark, said in the end,
You'll get your 30 pieces of silver, I'm quite sure.
The adverse publicity only served to make the film even more popular and high profile. Meanwhile, going from strength to strength, the Pythons carried on with their varied and successful solo careers. Michael began his travel programs, Terry G directed Time Bandits, and together all the Pythons performed live at the Hollywood Bowl. Once again, the lure of working together proved to be strong. But the writing wasn't as easy for their fourth film, The Meaning of Life.
It's the meaning of life.
I think the writing on Meaning of Life was quite hard. I think it wasn't quite the same as it had been, and also making the film. I mean, it was like Meaning of Life. In all the other films, everybody was always around, and it was always possible to get people to chip in and consult with people. Meaning of Life was very much everybody filmed it and went off and did their own things, and so it was didn't feel quite so much of a group effort in a way.
I never enjoyed Meaning of Life. I always regarded that entire film as a bit of a cock-up.
it didn't have the smooth development dynamic that something like Life of Brian had. We had to keep pushing it. You got stuck in the middle of the road. Oh, write a few more sketches, push it a little further towards the end. And eventually we got 90 minutes or 100 minutes, whatever we got. And I don't think it holds together as well as other Python films, but I think it contains, in things like sort of Mr. Creosote, for instance, some of the most extraordinary images that we've done and some of the funniest material.
Good afternoon, sir, and how are we today? Better. Better? Better get a bucket. I'm going to throw up. Gaston, a bucket for monsieur.
One of the sketches that didn't work when we first read it out was the Mr. Creosote sketch, is the fat man throwing up in the restaurant. I think it was just after lunch, and Mike read it out, and nobody thought it was funny. It was just one of those things. It just went to the bottom of the pile, and I felt, Mike and I were convinced that was one of our funniest sketches. And that went to the bottom of the pile. And then about a month later, John rang me up and said, well, little Plum, I think something to bring a smile to your face. I just read that Mr. Creosote sketch. I think it could be really funny. And then he and Graham wrote the wafer-thin mint thing for the ending.
And finally, monsieur, a wafer-thin mint. Bah. Oh, sir, it's only a tiny little thin one. Now, fuck off, I'm full. Oh, sir. It's only a wafer-thin. Yeah, I couldn't eat another thing. I'm absolutely stuffed. Bugger all. Oh, sir, just one. Oh, just one. Just the one. Yeah. Voila. Bon appétit.
The film looks really good. And it won the jury prize at Cannes, which was fabulous too. We played it, and on the jury, we played Mr. Creosote, and on the jury was Orson Welles, who at that time was closest to being Mr. Creosote in real life than anybody possibly, eating with both hands, I think. And they voted it the jury prize. They wanted to make it the best film. And one of the writers on there said, no, you can't do this. So we only got the jury prize. Damn them bastards.
With The Meaning of Life now completed, the Pythons were hitting their stride in their solo careers. As ever, the projects were many and varied. Books, travel programs, films directed, written, a whole bunch of stuff. With perfect comic timing, on the eve of their 20th anniversary, Gray and Chapman ceased to be.
I was very, very glad, I'm so fortunate when this is possible, actually to be there when he died. Michael and I were there, and Peter Cook, I think, and David Sherlock, of course, and I think there were one or two others. And somehow being there and then having that amazingly cathartic memorial service afterwards, one felt that one had been through it. And I guess that we're all thinking how sad it is that a man of such talent, of such capability for kindness, of such unusual intelligence, should now so suddenly be spirited away at the age of only 48, before he'd achieved many of the things of which he was capable, and before he'd had enough fun. Well, I feel that I should say nonsense. Good riddance to him, the freeloading bastard. I hope he's fried.
For the Pythons today, demand is still high, pulling them all off in different directions. But what everyone still wants to know is, will the Pythons ever work together again? The question kind of pisses them off, but it still hangs over them like a large albatross wearing a big woolly jumper.
We got an offer to do a 6-week tour of American cities with a $10 million guarantee. And we were going to have film festivals in each city before we got there, and then they would have all the books, the records, and we would just come in and we do Python, say goodbye. And everybody said yes to this, and then Michael came back from one holiday and said no, you know, and he went. So at that point, I realized that we would never, ever agree on anything ever again.
There is pressure always to reform, and I think it's probably something that one should resist. But that's been an unpopular view in the last year, one which I have held, and it gets other Pythons a bit ratty, but I think it's probably best to remember us for all the good work that we did than clamber up on stage and sort of crutches and with sort of medical support and try and do the sketches all over again.
It is fun to be together, and we do have a good time when we finally get together, but it's just such a nightmare getting everybody together that it's life's too short in the end.
What worries me is there's a standard that we're going to be measured by. It's the one we set, and that's dangerous. And I think there's nothing more embarrassing than a bunch of middle-aged old farts trying to recreate the halcyon days of Python humor.
Maybe in 3 years' time, the spirit will change, or we'll all think we'll be dead soon, so we'll do, I don't know. But not in the foreseeable future.
I think actually, as far as a reunion is concerned, this is it. Sorry, chaps.
So, how do you end a documentary like Python? Because Python believed in no endings, man. So, I thought, here, we should have no ending. We're not going to stop. We're not going to say stop. We can't, we can't. We just, because you'd expect that. That's predictable. Documentary end, but no, we're just going to go. When Terry Jones is at, he's upstairs. He's at his wife Alison upstairs. We don't get out of here. We told him to shut up earlier. So it's not going to end. It's not going to end in honor to Python, man. Just going to.
Great. That was really good. That was 45 seconds. That was the right length.
We haven't finished yet. We're still going.
That's good.
So how do we end?
Hmm?
No.